Welcome to another edition of Community Cop. My name is Michael Graves, co-founding member of 100 Blacks and Law Enforcement Who Care. Today, I'll be operating solo without Noel Leader and Julian Harper. I will be doing this alone, and certainly I'm going to have to stay in step with what we've always established and the way we do the work we do. So there will be no inquisition later, because if I do anything less, they'll say what happened. So we're gonna get started right now. And just want to say that to those who might not know, we certainly start with somewhere around this week in our history. Our history is replete with things we don't have to get into revisionist history or make up anything. So let's hit the ground running and get started. From the outset, this is the anniversary, certainly, of Emmit Till. Emmit Till was a Chicago youth, young Black child, 14 years old. And he went, of course, to see his relatives, his uncles, as well as his grandfather in Money, Mississippi. And in doing so, his mother warned him and had that talk, so to speak, with him to let him know that things are different in Mississippi as opposed to Chicago, and therefore he would have to comport himself a different way. But as you know the story, allegedly, that Miss Bryant made up that he said something smart or slick, something to her to that effect. And in telling her husband and his brother, they in turn came to his house several nights later, late at night, went from room to room after they got his family to open the door. They went room to room, snatched him out of the bed at gunpoint, and took him away. Of course, the grandfather asked, could he just whip him for whatever possibly might have happened, which he knew nothing of. And they told him no, told him to just shut up, and they took him never to be seen again alive. So in any event, and we know that they literally bragged, and everybody knew they did it, and they were identified as the ones who took him out of the house in a court of law, and it still didn't have any gravity to it, and they were exonerated. So in any event, we should never forget what happened to Emmit Till, because that's a recurrent theme in our history we need to be cognizant of. Things like that, and not just forget it and look at it as an isolated incident, because there were a lot of Emmit Tills then and now. So let's keep that in mind. To keep going, 8/28 was the March on Washington in 1963, and that march was for jobs and freedom. Oftentimes we forget, because that's where the historic speech, "I Have a Dream," captivated so much of America, and still to this day it resounds. I have a dream. That wasn't the first time, of course, Dr. King used it. It came from before, and when it was shouted out, he used it again that day to forever be etched in people's memory. Now, also, this is Fred Hampton, 8/30/1948. This is his birthday. And we should not forget the contributions of a fantastic young man, charismatic, great leadership, thought-provoking, insightful, positive man that stood for the people and did so much for our community in that short time, starting as early as a youth in NAACP, always community-minded, and was the leader of the Black Panther Party in Chicago and was killed at 21 years old. So this was a young man, and most of the Panthers were, for the most part at that time, very young. And he too, like his compatriots, captivated and really struck a responsive chord in our people. So this is his birthday, and he should not be forgotten. I know there was a movie a year ago about him, but the movie doesn't get to really explain the extent. Yeah, you sort of love, because he loved our people, and some of his classic speeches, that he did, some of it was in the movie, but it only scratched the surface of the true dedication of Fred Hampton. So let's be mindful of that. And at this point, we'll get started with some contemporary things. Here's one from the outset. In Columbus, Ohio, the police department shot Donovan Lewis, a black man, 20 years old, a 20-year-old black man, while he was laying in the bed. Now, this black man was alleged to be holding a vape pen. That's like, one of those metal cigarette things where you draw in it and it, smoke comes out. Well, they claim that he had that. Now, we've heard of having hairbrush. We've heard of wallets, keychains, all sorts of incidents in New York Police Department as well as others. But this one, a vape pen, you laying in the bed, they came in on an arrest warrant, allegedly for domestic violence and improper handling of a firearm. That was the charge on the warrant. Here. Here.
You want to watch that? Well, I'm worried about the back door. You think you can get out that glass block? No. There's two windows. There's one with an AC unit and then the glass one.
Send that dog in. Hands. Come in now. Got somebody. Come in now. Hands. Hands.
Let me see your right hand.
His name is Donovan Lewis, and want to see how they handle it. But the video, if you watch it, it clearly shows that there was no gun in his hand. There was no gun found at the scene. And he was literally laying in the bed when the police officer shot. You hear audio to make it sound like things were basically done by the letter, but
two windows.
Before they even got up to his apartment, they were singing, "Here comes the thunder, here comes the thunder." The cop was saying that, here comes the thunder, so he basically was talking himself up, working himself up to a frenzy. So, he couldn't wait to shoot. And as they all opened the door to his bedroom, the cop just started shooting. So in any event, be mindful of that and keep your eye on that, because here you have a case where a young 20-year-old man, as life is cut short, totally unnecessary, because you could have waited, and it could have been handled totally different, So as you watch the video, you could see that there was no need, and there was nothing showing something shiny in his hand pointing at anyone. So let's be mindful of that. Former CIA director Michael Hayden, he was appointed by George Bush. This is how far this goes back. He was appointed by George Bush he made a statement last week saying that this current GOP is the most dangerous political force he's ever seen. Now, obviously, his background is so profound, where he was the CIA director from 2006 to 2009. Prior to that, he was NSA director from 1999 to 2005. And prior to that, he was a 4-star admiral in the Navy. So when someone like that tells you straight up that things are dangerous, it's dangerous. Now, this is not coming from 100 Blacks in law enforcement who care. This is coming from a white man who served in literally every capacity one can imagine. Can you imagine being a lifelong soldier to reach the rank of a 4-star? Now you have 4 stars, there's nothing higher unless you're gonna be, directly involved with not only the Pentagon, but the White House. So joint chair, joint chair of the chiefs of staff, something along those lines. There's nothing higher in a military uniform. So for him and also to be a card-carrying Republican now, that's been a Republican his whole life, appointed by Republican presidents to key positions. And to now say, after all of these years, that he cannot believe what he's witnessing. Now, when you're talking about January 6th, and he's pointing out that the January 6th situation is such that a crowd of people that attack, not only we're talking about the building, not so much just the attack on the building, but the endangerment of lives at the building where Congress resides. If they were in fact doing a count, the count to ratify the election, and any crowd that comes there to interrupt that is violating so many laws. And for that to happen under the auspices of recommendations by President Trump at that time, he was still president on January 6th. I think that was the power changed hands 19th or 20th, the 20th. But in any event, for him to approve of that action and then to say that if he runs again and gets elected, he will forgive them. How do you say that and say you're law enforcement, you're pro law enforcement, when this group is actually threatening the Department of Justice, which is law enforcement, and is threatening the FBI, which is one of the greatest law enforcement forces in the country. Now, when I say great, I'm saying with respect to finance, technology, science, and all that it does, it's great in that regard. Now, it's a whole nother thing if you talk about the relationship with the FBI and our people. That would be totally different. That's a whole nother ball game. But I'm saying that if it came down to an attack, which it did in Cincinnati, there were shots fired at the FBI building, and ultimately the shooter was killed in Ohio. It's not being talked about much, but the person who shot at the building after all these major threats were done was killed. So you can't take that lightly of what they're doing. Now, why do I say that? The FBI has a history so ugly, and I'm not just talking about things like Marcus Garvey or any socialist of that day, black or white, the Marcus Garvey movement, later on, the Nation of Islam, Black Panther Party, Republic of New Africa, BLA, all major civil rights organizations were all influenced, investigated, terrorized, put out of business, all sorts of groups by the FBI. So when I said great, I'm just saying great the same way you say a storm is great. You know, even though it killed people, it's devastating. But I'm just saying in that regard, so the FBI is now under attack, under threat, where it has to watch its back. You know, you gotta, you know, your head better be on it, you know, swivel, and you better protect the six. You better protect that six. The six is your back. So you better protect that, you know, so it's not what's in front of you. You have to watch that 6 o'clock. It's not the 9 or the 3 or the 12, it's the 6. You better watch yourself. They are no longer, they claimed at one time, the GOP claimed to be pro-law enforcement, pro-military, pro-intelligence. Well, that's not the case anymore. They killed a police officer. Now, there was another officer who, after the trauma of January 6th at the Capitol building, did commit suicide. That's not the one I'm talking about. I'm talking about the officer, the police officer that they killed. He died from wounds the next day. He was struck in the back of the head by all reports by a fire extinguisher at the Capitol building. He was inside defending the Capitol building. He was attacked. Now, they gave 4 attackers assault charges. Now, whoever heard of you beat somebody down, they die as a result of the beating, and then you turn around and charge them with assault. That's so light-handed and so against what the history dictates. It's not only what the history says, it's what it dictates. There has to be homicide, you know, felony homicide charges in that regard. But they somehow, everybody's engaging in willful blindness. Everybody, not only the Republican Party, but the Democrat Party. Department of Justice Garland, you know, the head of the Department of Justice, he hasn't charged anybody with the murder of the police. I wish I had the name in front of me. It's in my notes, but you'll see the name. And he was killed. You saw other officers tortured. You saw an officer screaming like a woman getting her pocketbook snatched while his vertebrae was being torn asunder. He was caught in between the door and the crowd trying to pull him out and trying to beat him down all at one time. There was another officer who got pulled outside of the door. The crowd pulled him out while the Capitol Police watched. What law enforcement agency, other than them, knowing full well that those were Donald Trump supporters, would not have walked out of that building and retrieved a fallen soldier who was down? They took the gun, they shot him with bear spray so he couldn't see. He's begging for his life. And when they took his gun, trained the gun on him, he begged them, please don't kill me. Please don't shoot me. I got kids at home. That was his response. I got kids at home. They didn't kill him, but they could have. They killed the Capitol police officer that was inside. He died hours later, came to for a while, and then tapped out again and died the next morning. We reported that the very next day on Community Cop of the early death, and the news wasn't really saying too much about it. They don't say too much about it now, but he was killed. So how do you be pro law enforcement and you turning on police officers that was doing their duty? And by the way, it was good to know that last week, the police officer who from New York City, the police officer from New York City that went to DC and attacked another active, he was retired. He attacked the active Capitol police officer. He got sentenced to 10 years for that assault. So how do you prosecute him and convict him of assault? He gets 10 years, but there are no criminal felony homicide charges against the people involved who killed a Capitol police officer. This is incredible. To add to that story, you have political figures. Now, it's one thing the mob doing what they did, and this was sedition at its finest. You know, this group, this mob that did that are receiving air cover from elected officials. Now, you have Newt Gingrich calling the FBI wolves. The FBI are now wolves. Isn't that something? Newt Gingrich, one of the symbols of white supremacy from Georgia, is actually calling them wolves. Now you have Lindsey Graham talking about if Donald Trump is charged, it's going to be blood in the streets. What is the person? Well, put it this way: there are various other elected officials who are defending it. The minority leader in the House, he's come out to defend these actions and warning of what's going to happen to Trump. The same thing in the U.S. Senate. So McConnell, that's his name, McConnell, he's defending it. So what do you say to these individuals? What do you say when Donald Trump himself calls them vicious animals? I think was one of the terms that he used. For him to call them vicious animals or monsters. What is that saying? Now, if Black people said these things, they would go after Black folks with reckless abandon. But you have the white leadership of this country and Democrats, and Republicans for the most part. I don't know what Democrats are saying, and they're not really going after what's being said. You have some news anchors that are critiquing it, but the Democrats are just remaining quiet. But when you have these leaders defending these acts, where do you go? What do you say? Now you have, let's say, for example, Black people can critique the way Marcus Garvey was treated by the FBI, how they used trumped up charges to deport Marcus Garvey at the height of his success. What do you say about, and that was, we're talking about in the 1920s, but currently, I was just talking about, I mentioned that it was Fred Hampton's birthday. Well, how do you describe, now they were not described as wolves by Newt Gingrich and others during the time that Fred Hampton and Mark Clark was systematically assassinated by utilizing under the auspices of their relationship with the Chicago Police Department, a sanctioned assassination by Chicago police of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. Did anybody say the Chicago Police Department, in conjunction with the FBI, were they called wolves then? Were they called vicious animals then? No, they weren't. What about the FBI and its goal to destroy the Black Panther Party and George Jackson, who was behind bars during a so-called riot of sorts, a rebellion in jail? He was isolated and killed, shot in the head. This was intent. No authorities were called vicious wolves and animals. And that was a hit. It was sanctioned. And the FBI, during the counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program. Now I know last show we did, we said COINTEL several times, and I thought later that maybe some people might not recognize what COINTEL, that's an acronym for the counterintelligence program that was discovered, that the FBI had implemented to disgrace, destroy Black organizations, to isolate them from the Black community, destroy the leadership. It would be used to go into their offices, into their homes, into their meetings, and utilize everything in the arsenal of the FBI to destroy Black organizations. So keep that in mind. So George Jackson was killed, even though he was behind bars already. During that counterintelligence program, what role did the FBI play in the killing of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? What role? Certainly, you can't trust their investigation. You know, they would have you believe that it was one person, and that person was set up, it was a patsy. So in any event, you can't just believe that because they said it, because they found themselves to be untruthful so many times. Our history is littered with attacks from the FBI. Now you have white supremacist organizations, paramilitaries, Proud Boys, you know, the Oath Takers, and these organizations. Now the 3%ers and all of it, they are on the warpath with the elected officials, with the right wing, the extreme right wing of the Republican Party, or they're on the warpath. Now, even Comey, who's a card-carrying Republican, by the way, when he was director, and he served during the Obama years, he was in charge when the massacre of Mother Emanuel in Charleston, South Carolina occurred. He was the FBI director. He said that it was not a terrorist event. He closed the door on all that, just calling it a criminal act of a lone wolf. So there was no investigation into the actions of the shooter, his associations, and what organizations did he belong to. That was all cut off by Comey, Director Comey, saying that it was not terrorism. And yet Loretta Lynch, who was his boss, technically, because she was the head of the Department of Justice, which he got when Holder stepped down, Eric Holder stepped down. So here is somebody under you telling you, and she just kept her mouth shut and did not insist on an investigation into Dylan Roof and to find out who his associates are. That didn't happen. And yet, today, 2022, you have them attacking the FBI. You have them attacking Capitol Police and police officers all over, raising questions. They was always pro-military. You know, you were so pro-military when Colin Kaepernick, when he said what he said, and in fact doing that, when he said that he was concerned about Black men, women, and children being killed by police officers that were not in the commission of a crime. So he was concerned about innocent, not guilty people who were criminals. He was concerned about innocent men, women, and children who were being unnecessarily killed by police officers. So by the time Floyd happened, who could deny it? So we didn't lash out. You didn't see people, crazed radicals and others attacking the FBI, the Department of Justice. We could raise questions about a whole host of things with the Department of Justice. We could raise questions as to what really happened in the assassination of Malcolm X. It's not like the Department of Justice and the FBI that didn't know. Well, years later, when one of the shooters, one of the true shooters, gave the names of 5 people involved, they were not subsequently arrested. The Department of Justice, the FBI, was behind the scenes. Now, the FBI knew all along that it was a 5-man hit team of Malcolm X. The police department, the New York City Police Department, said it was 3 people. So you starting off on the wrong foot from the outset. The FBI knew it was 5, yet the police department said it was 3. And the descriptions were totally different, which means that the FBI had people in there. Well, we found out from not much else from a documentary done much later, but everybody had somebody in there. There were a lot of people that provided information to the police department. As many as 8 or 9 was inside in civilian attire that gave information. So why did only one of the true shooters end up in jail and 2 other people that were innocent? Well, actually, they did want to frame and blame the Nation of Islam. They did not want other people to be investigated as to what really happened that at the Audubon Ballroom. So, you know, you have a situation now where the FBI is under attack, and for all the wrong reasons. But as I said, we can give a lot of reasons as to why there should be questions about them, but not the ones they're giving right now with respect to the GOP. But Joe Biden has weighed in and talked about GOP leaders, and it's a difference. He's not claiming everybody in the GOP, but he was concerned about their leadership. And you could see the signs when they moved on any elected official that went along in any way with Democrats in these investigations that are going on. They forced them in primaries and took some of them out. So in any event, Biden raised questions about that, basically by saying that the leadership, and he said that he wasn't saying everybody in the GOP, he was basically talking about the MAGA sections of the GOP. So he was the first one to of note to launch a salvo directly at the Republican Party, because he had to. When they're moving on the FBI, you have to say something. So after that shooting, like I said, in Ohio, something had to be said. It wasn't like he would have said that, but because of what happened in Ohio and all these constant threats that are happening online, or well as verbal threats coming from, and certainly when you get Lindsey Graham saying it's going to be blood in the streets, you just can't ignore that. Okay, so in any event, I want to also mention 3 white supremacist killers. Travis McMichael, Gregory McMichael, and William Bryan, and I'm sure those are names that are familiar to you, because those were the 3 individuals that was convicted of killing Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. Now, these individuals are now trying to get, since they were convicted in the state court, and now they got convicted of federal charges, they want to do their time in a federal jail as opposed to a Georgia state jail. Now, you know that there's a difference in Fed time and state time, and they are fully aware of it and cognizant of the difference. And so they're trying to go to a federal penitentiary and do their time because it's easier, it's lighter. But since they was convicted first and foremost of state charges, they should not be allowed to go to a federal penitentiary, which they would enjoy in a federal prison. So we'll see how that goes. But as of now, as we speak, their time will be in a state jail. But that's what's going on right now, and that's subject to change. That's why I'm bringing it to your attention. Pope Francis, recently, he's going on what would be I guess it would be some type of atonement, you would call it, for he apologized to the indigenous people of Canada, Native Americans, or whatever you want to call them, Native Canadians. He's apologized for the abuse of the residential schools that was set up by the Catholics, going back well over 100-something years. This went on a century and a half ago, and still goes on, where he's on this pilgrimage. He's on a religious pilgrimage to apologize for past wrongs. And so the children were forcibly removed from their homes. They were systematically raped by Catholics, especially boys. They were raped and beaten and were forced to assimilate to a Catholic, Christian, Canadian society. They were forcibly removed, remember that, forcibly removed from their homes. They were victims of physical, sexual abuse by the Catholics, and they were beaten even if they just spoke their native tongue. They were beaten because they could only speak English. They were forced to primarily speak only English. That's why sometimes you run into Native Americans now and they can't speak in their tongue. So he meaning Pope Francis, has been traveling over Canada, apologizing as he has done for some, past transgressions. And so Canada gave a few $1 billion to Native Americans, and the Catholic Church gave some millions. Now the Canadians gave billions with a B, and you had Catholics giving 50 with I think 30 with another 50 million coming to them, and that's going to be divided of over 90,000 survivors of these types of practices that they had to endure as a child. Just imagine if you were forcibly removed from your house, taken miles away to a distant place, and it was supposed to be a school. Yet in that school, you was treated as if you were a slave. You were forced and indoctrinated to learn your slave master's language, and you were raped. Sounds familiar, don't it? Sounds like something that happened here with us. But in any event, and this was done by state-funded, Canadian-funded, but also Catholic-funded schools, sleepaway schools. So, the Pope Francis is apologizing, and yet there are voices from the Native American community that say that's not enough to apologize, and that, land that was taken from them, their childhoods that were removed from them, it's not enough just to apologize. Let's keep that in mind. Now, they're going to pay another 50 million over the next 5 years. Now, if you find that eerily similar to us, we were taken to a foreign land. Our culture was taken and destroyed. Our language is gone. None of us who survived these centuries of oppression can speak our native tongues. So we don't speak the language of Ghana, Guinea, Kenya, Nigeria, Gambia. We don't speak those languages. We've maintained our features for the most part. They don't tell you that little boys were raped. You read books, and when you read those books, it'll describe the slave masters' little boys were bed warmers. I saw one book in particular called them bed warmers. Now, what does a grown man want a little boy to warm his bed for? That's what your wife is for. Or that's one of the things your wife is for, not to reduce a woman's side to just warming the bed. You warm the bed for her, she warm the bed for you, whoever gets in the bed first. But what you doing with little boys in your bed, you're a married man. It just showed how sick he was. That's what went on in Canada with them boys and the Catholic Church. They were systematically raped across the board. And this didn't go on for 10 years, 20 years, 1 decade, 2 decades, 3 decades. It went on for over a century plus. So, there was no retribution these are just apologies and some modicum of reparations that they're receiving now. But the people were devastated. And we should be mindful of that, that when a people is destroyed systematically like that, the common term is genocide. Now, who are they going to volunteer that was genocide against Native people? No. Well, that went on here too. Native Americans, they were forced into these schools away from home. They were raped. They were exploited, indoctrinated into a new system, and were ashamed. Some of them came back ashamed of their Native American heritage, their customs, folklore. They were ashamed and thought little of that culture, which was lost. Not all of them, because some of them was able to retain enough when they went back home eventually, but they were for the most part devastated. Now, for the Pope to settle that today, and I'm not doubting that his good intentions, but you can argue too little, too late. Obviously, he wasn't there during those times, but if you felt that way and that strong about it, then clean up things now. Little boys in poor countries are still being raped. When you look at El Salvador and Nicaragua and all these places, or the Catholics done in Africa, in various locations in Latin American countries, the abuse still goes on. There are people that were abused in New York City over the years, and they're still around. Clean it all up. Part of atoning is to go after the ones that are still around. There's Catholic priests and bishops and what have you that are still around now, raping little boys. That's why they have those numbers on TV. If you were raped as a child, you call those numbers and you might receive some type of recompense. So again, the Pope, and I'm not doubting his good intentions at all, but I'll just say for the record, it's not enough. So now, again, and let me just remind those who might not know that while these things are still going on, you have people that are afraid if Trump runs again, that it's going to be worse. Let's not act like we don't know about white supremacy and the fact that this is nothing new. We faced this before. After 9/11, you might have gotten a hi or a hello from a white person that one day because they were so focused in on Arabs that we might have gotten a pass that one day. But in short order, they were back on the clock and they were back to doing what they do to our people in no short order. So let's keep that in mind. Got quite a few other things. Here's one. The current status of the killers of Rayshon Brooks, which were two police officers, by the way. Police officer Rolfe and police officer Garrett, they fired shots killing Rayshon Brooks Now, just remember that Rowe fired the fatal shots that kill him, and that killed him, and he said, "I got him," when he shot him, and then he kicked Brooks while Brooks laid on the ground. And while he laid on the ground, police officer Dobbin Brosman then stood over Brooks, stood right on top of his shoulder with his foot on him. Both of those cops were reinstated. Okay? Both of those cops was recently reinstated. Now, one was fired immediately and one had resigned. See, there's a different playbook in different scenarios that police departments use. The one officer resigned right away, and the other one was fired. But in any event, they used the way that the one who was terminated and said it was done illegally by an independent board looked at it. Now they both are back at work. You can shoot a person, a black man, you can kick him, and then the other officer can put his foot and stand right on his shoulder, and now you get your job back. It's almost like what Donald Trump said, "I will forgive them of their charges, and then I'll apologize." Well, what did Georgia do right here? They reinstated both police officers after shooting Brooks in the parking lot of a burger joint, Burger King or one of them. And he gets they both got their jobs back. So why am I saying this? Don't act like this new regime that's in now or the things that are going on now are new. They're not. They're not new. It's just the playbook at times change. Different people come to the fore. So whether it's the Proud Boys, Oath Takers, 3%ers, and all these other groups, you see a change here or there, but basically it's the same people. It's white supremacy at its finest, and that's our job. Our job is to fight it wherever it raises its head and not always be reactionary. Let's be more pro than reactive. So in any event, I say that to say to each of us that we got to do better. When you got a 4-star general telling you he's never seen this, and by the time you got 4 stars, you done saw everything, and he's let the NSA, which is even more secret than the CIA. And when he's telling you that things are bad and he's fearful, and even though he's a card-carrying Republican, he did not endorse Donald Trump in 2020. He's telling you it's bad. We have to expand our horizon, see things in a better way, understand the words of Marcus Garvey, who said, "Up, you mighty people, you can accomplish what you will." And I believe that and I stand by that. Up, you mighty people, you can accomplish what you will. Marcus Garvey said we're a sleeping giant, and that all you got to do is wake up, because a tree without roots won't stand. So I say, Black man, Black woman, protect the Black child, accept your own, and be yourself. Godspeed.
First of all, thank you all for being here today. It's very important to all of us that this story continues to be told as information tumbles out. As you all know, 1 week ago, almost to the minute, I stood before you and walked you through the body cam video and what exactly happened on Tuesday, August 30th, and nothing has changed since then. The body cam video clearly showed multiple police officers armed descending into an apartment with an attack dog to apprehend a unarmed 20-year-old black man in the middle of the night while he was asleep. And as we all know, we saw that dog approach the room, and the police officer pull the dog back, open the door, and then within a split second, that police officer took the fatal shot that killed Donovan Lewis.
You'll hear that over and over again from many different people who touched him in his life in different places and in different ways, whether it's a teacher, a coach, one of his best friends. He cared about others. He was active in the community, both volunteering alongside the rest of us, and he also he wanted other people to be well. Whether he didn't have anything himself, he would share the last of whether it would be food, money, whatever he had, to make sure that others were safe and protected to the best of his ability.
What kind of policies or programming, anything, are you really hoping comes out of Donovan Lewis's case? For example,
the last week has been very tough. There's a plethora of emotions, from being sad to angry to fear, the fear that it can happen to you as well. It's not okay. And over the time I've been able to grieve and reflect, and I've been looking at pictures of Donovan and I, and there's one picture that stands out, and it's Donovan in I think 2015, and when he's at a protest, and
Right here.
right here, and it's crazy to see that someone who's passionate and adamant about those type of things, that can happen to them as well. He knew this is not something that's he was oblivious to. We know these things happen, but we're still here asking the same questions. Why? We've put in money, we put in manpower, and nothing changes ever. It's the same thing. As people said last week was the third police shooting in 10 days. It's not okay. Things do need to change, and we all know it. So.